talk about putting that cutter to the glass and what's sort of important to know for being successful at getting a good score.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to talk about that. The translucent colors are really easy, especially like a blue or a clear or a black. Find them real easy. The pinks and the whites sometimes are a little harder. That being said, different amount of pressure is required for each glass. And a lot of people ask, well, how hard should I be pressing? There's a couple ways to know if you've got the right pressure. And I tend to like to cut a little bit off my glass first and figure it out before I start cutting a whole bunch of pieces and ruining them. And then I know it's like doing a little
like a expensive sheet of glass. Sometimes it might be kind of nice to get a feel for it before you dive in and break it to oblivion trying it. So
100%. And as we were talking earlier, the pistol grip, people really can get a lot of strength down on that glass. So you got to be careful. You can overscore. Some people don't realize that, but the perfect score is going to be a real light score line that you hear, but does not put a white fuzz along it or effervescence along the score line, because when you score glass and then break it, glass is looking for the path of least resistance. We're not actually cutting the glass through, we're cutting the surface of the glass and convincing it to break where we want it to break. I kiddingly liken it to skiing, which is controlled falling. This is controlled breaking, right? So that's what we're doing. And this is what the sound should sound like. And if you can see that, there's no white popping up on that score. In fact, really what you can see is just a little bit of my oil trail. And other than that, and then it's gonna be a super clean run.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know it was possible to, I knew you could underscore by not pressing your cutter hard enough, but I did not know that you could overscore by pressing it too hard. You just would think that by pressing it as much as you can, it would choose to follow that score line a lot better. That's interesting.
That is the common thought. Here's what happens actually. You're introducing micro fractures along that score line by pressing too hard. And every now and then, especially if it hits a little divot or there's a little unevenness on the surface that you're cutting on, it can cause the wheel to kind of jump on the surface of the glass a little bit, or even that micro fracture, and it's enough just for the glass to say, oh, this is easier for me to go this way. Yeah. So
very interesting. Can you ever start scoring in the middle of a sheet? Where's sort of the best way for someone who hasn't maybe cut glass, a bunch of glass, how do you start a good score line? How much pressure do you know to put? And what if you mess up and lift up sorry, that's a lot of questions, but
a lot of good questions
I just would love to see the perfect ideal score again, if you
no problem. Let's talk about that. So if you notice, when we started this score, we started at one end and went all the way through off to the end.
Okay.
Can you start in the middle? Not really, because glass needs to start at one end and run through to the other end. It's not like paper where you can just cut it out necessarily.
Sure.
Occasionally you'll see people who can do a circle and massage it out, but that's rare. Yeah, that's not easy and rare. So we're looking to go from one end to another. You always have to have a start point and an end point, and you want to go through the whole thing. If you stop your score or start it just a hair inside, the glass is going to pick where it wants to go to finish. It's going to run out.
Okay.
And again, the pressure that you want is you want to hear the scratch on the glass, but you don't want to see that white popping. So when I go to score, I'm going to push down.
And you should hear it every time like that nice, crisp kind of sound.
And that's the tap wheel again. So we just use the tap wheel. If we're using a smooth rolling wheel like the TC10 here, it's going to sound very similar, though a little quieter.
Yeah.
Now you heard my cutter went off the end, and some people say, oh, you can't do that, you're gonna chip it. But that's good, actually. I'd rather go off the end a little bit.
Just as long as it's not maybe an aggressive go off the end.
Right, exactly. But especially if you're cutting on a grid like this, like on the Morton surface, it's plastic. It's not gonna hurt my tungsten carbide wheel on my Toyo cutter, so it's great. And I like this because my little shards fall in there when I'm cutting. So it gives me
one of these, and I must agree, they're amazing for cutting on.
So Anyway, so that's our good score right there, is you want it to be a light touch, only as much as you need to be able to get the glass to scratch like that and go from one end to the other. And another thing you may consider is angle.
Okay.
You'll notice on the Toyo cutter, it's kind of interesting, but it's got a different angle here than it does on the other side where the screw is. And that actually helps me know exactly how I want to angle my cutter. I want to rock it back just a little bit. The screw should always be up.
Okay.
So you don't screw up. And then you rock it back just a little bit, and that will allow the cutter to follow my hand wherever I'm going. It's a caster. So if I'm doing a big score and I want to go around this way, you'll notice by leaning it back, it tracks exactly where my hand goes.
I see.
I didn't even put a finger on the wheel.
Now what happens if, say I'm cutting a particularly difficult piece of glass and, I've lifted up, my dog barked and I lifted up my cutter in the middle of cutting. What do you do? What do you do if you're...
Great question. What I will typically do is if I've gotten halfway through, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Don't rescore. You never want to go back over a score.
Okay.
So what I will do is you can feel the groove of where the score was and go right to the end of that and just pick it up and keep going.
Okay. So never ever go backwards.
Never go backwards.
The myth is, or not the myth, but what they say is true. It's bad for your cutter to go backwards.
They do, and it is kind of bad. It will beat up your wheel a little bit.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a file on your wheel because the glass edges are real sharp, and so you can wear down your wheel. It's not great, and it's not necessarily going to do anything better for your score. So.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Ask you another question?
Yeah.
Can you see what it looks like to overscore a piece of glass?
Oh, great question.
Can you see it?
Absolutely. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, and since the pistol grip is one of the great tools for overscoring because you can push so hard, let's try that. First of all, you can hear it.
Oh, yeah.
And look at that. You can easily see all that white popping up there. That is the sign of an overscore.
Okay.
And also, especially when you're fusing, you'll see those little marks on the surface of the glass. You want a really clean break like this. And you can see how perpendicular that is too. I mean, it's perfect, and there's no little rivulets or anything on that line. And if you go to score that, put that in a kiln and melt it together, it's gonna be a super clean line when you put your two pieces of glass together. Whereas if you have all the little pieces from that, you may have to grind it to try and clean it up, or you'll see some of those little pieces when you
you can tell just
when you
the
fuse
way the
it.
glass breaks right there too, with the difference with an overscore. You can see it's a lot. It looks different.
Actually, let's run that score and you can see the difference. Can you see the little at the top?
Yep, I can see where it's not as smooth, and it's got a lot of these like little divots on the inside. So it's crazy that it changes the glass so much. You wouldn't think that little simple score line, even though it cut or it broke very cleanly, that it's not as clean of a piece as this. So, interesting.
It'll actually run like butter when you get the perfect pressure on your score.
Okay.
It feels it feels good. So anyways, those are some tips and tricks to how to cut. Did you have I think one other thing that might be good to know is sometimes glass has little seed pockets in it. Or some glass is more textured than others, right? And there isn't necessarily, especially in hand-rolled glass, let's say like a Ouroboros, their glass.
You kind of see the seediness in some of this, in this sheet right here.
Right. So sometimes your glass cutter will hit a little piece like that, and people will get stuck, and it's a little bit frustrating. And the best thing to do is just take a breath and relax. I'm gonna hit this one. Oh, I hit it. You can stop, and sometimes I'll just use my thumb and just push through it until I get just past it, and then I can keep going.
And as long as you keep that pressure, you'll still be fine, and it'll break.
Yep.
Okay?
It'll be no problem. So let's run this thing.
Beautiful.
There you go.
Okay, well, thank you for kind of walking me through cutting glass out and how to get the perfect score line. I really appreciate your help, and I'd love to talk about running pliers and just breaking glass, different techniques to break glass, if you're okay with talking about that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Since you got to do that right after you score anyways, that's a natural.
Okay.
Let's get into it.